Welcome back. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere cold, somewhere unforgiving, a place where survival wasn't guaranteed, where every breath of winter air could be your last if you weren't prepared. We're going back to early America, to the frontier colonies, to a time when winter meant something entirely different than it does now. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the smell, wood smoke drifting through frozen air, the earthy scent of damp leaves decomposing beneath the first frost, the sharp tang of pine resin. Can you hear it? The groan of ancient trees bending under the weight of ice, the distant cry of crows warning of the approaching cold. This is where our story begins. Before we go any further, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, but only if this content genuinely resonates with you. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love knowing we're all experiencing this together, scattered across time zones, connected by curiosity. Now, let the lights go low. Let's step back in time. Picture this. You're walking down a narrow trail, late autumn leaves crunching beneath your boots like shattered pottery. Each step echoes in the stillness. The ground has already begun to freeze in patches, creating a mosaic of hard earth and mud. Behind you stands a solitary cabin, rough-hewn logs stacked imperfectly, smoke spiraling lazily from a chimney that looks barely capable of standing through the winter ahead. The forest surrounds you on all sides, trees pressed together like a crowd of silent witnesses. You breathe in, pine, decay, cold earth. Above, the crows circle and call out, their voices harsh against the coming silence of winter. The frontier in those early centuries was brutal. People moved westward carrying hope like a torch, but often with little practical knowledge of what awaited them. Many settlers had never experienced a winter without the safety net of nearby towns, without markets or neighbours just to shout away. When that first frost arrived, it was beautiful, yes. The world transformed into something crystalline and pure. But it was also the beginning of a test. Roads became impassable, streams froze solid, and the long, grinding work of simply staying alive began in earnest. You pull your cloak tighter. You think about those who came before, the ones who cleared this very land with hands that went numb before noon. Some built their shelters quickly, driven by the panic of plummeting temperatures. Others procrastinated, and when the snow came early, they paid for that mistake with frostbite, hunger, sometimes worse. Historians continue to debate this. Did those first European pioneers underestimate the American winter because they didn't know better? Or was it arrogance, a belief that they could conquer nature through sheer will? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. What's certain is that they learned, fast, painfully. There's something almost meditative about the frontier in early winter. The forest goes quiet. Birds vanish. The river slows to a crawl beneath a skin of ice that thickens day by day. But that tranquility, it's a lie. For every peaceful snowfall, there's a blizzard waiting to bury homesteads. You can almost hear it. Wind slamming against wooden walls, the distant howl of wolves threading through the cracks, the ominous creak of roof beams bowing under the weight of snow. The air itself becomes hostile, clean, sharp, utterly merciless, and yet there's wonder in it too. You watch frost form on your mittens, each crystal catching the pale light like fragments of glass. Every breath feels strangely electric, alive. The people who settled this land wrote about that contradiction constantly. The terrible beauty of winter, the way it inspired both reverence and fear. One woman living on the Pennsylvania frontier described it perfectly. She called winter a season of death and purity, a time when life was forced into silence so that it might be reborn stronger. You can picture her, tending a struggling fire while her children sleep beneath quilts stitched together from scraps of worn clothing, every stitch a prayer for warmth. As you walk through this frozen landscape, real or imagined, the colours drain away. Everything becomes variations of grey and white. Time itself seems to slow, each moment stretching like taffy. The settlers noticed this too. They stopped marking time by months and started marking it by milestones. The last harvest, the first hard freeze, the night the well water turned to ice. Each event was an alarm bell, a reminder not to grow complacent. By December, life transformed completely. Daylight shrank to barely more than a few hours, and every single task revolved around two things: staying warm and staying fed. The human body adapted. Hands grew calloused and cracked. Faces became wind-burned, etched with lines of exhaustion. Every movement had to count. No wasted energy, no unnecessary trips outside. You can feel it in your own shoulders as you imagine hauling timber through knee-deep snow, or breaking through ice just to reach water below. The fatigue was constant, bone-deep, but so was the resilience. People discovered reserves of strength they never knew existed. Here's something you won't find in the romantic history books. Settlers learned to predict the severity of cold spells by listening to the trees. On the coldest nights, when temperatures plunged well below zero, the sap inside tree trunks would freeze and expand until the wood literally exploded, with loud, echoing cracks that sounded like gunshots. They called it the forest's gunfire. It was nature's way of reminding them that everything alive was under immense pressure. Which winter was the deadliest? Historians still argue about it. Was it 1780, when the Hudson River froze so solid that people walked across it and sea ice reached as far south as the Carolinas? Or was it 1816, the infamous year without a summer, when volcanic ash from Mount Tambora halfway around the world blocked out the sun and caused crops to fail across the hemisphere? Pick any of them, and the story's the same. Families huddled by fires that barely pushed back the darkness, counting rations, whispering prayers that spring would arrive before starvation did. Standing here in this moment of first frost, you understand something fundamental about the frontier. It wasn't about grand heroism or legendary bravery. It was about small, persistent acts of survival. Mending boots that had holes, chopping wood when your hands were already bleeding, rationing food down to the last dried bean. It's easy to romanticize the wilderness from the comfort of a heated home, but here, in this place, every breath burns your lungs, every step risks injury, and yet, somehow, people chose to stay. You pause at the cabin door. You look back at the woods one final time. Snow begins to fall again, soft as whispers. Flakes catch in your hair, melt against your lips, disappear. In that instant, the enormity of what lies ahead settles into your bones like a cold stone. You're not fighting the wilderness. That would be impossible. You're learning to coexist with it, to respect it, to survive it. The first frost has arrived. The long winter stretches ahead. Inside, the fire flickers weakly. Not much, but enough. And as you close the door behind you, shutting out the cold, you understand that everything from this moment forward will be shaped by that relentless chill pressing against the walls. Morning comes with the sound of timber creaking. Thin light filters through gaps in the log walls, casting pale stripes across the floor. Your breath fogs in front of your face before vanishing. The fire from last night has died down to barely glowing embers, and frost has formed on the inside of the window. You wrap your blanket tighter and realise what every settler eventually understood. A cabin isn't just a building. It's a statement, a declaration of intent against the winter itself. Building that cabin was the first real task. The work began months before the cold arrived, usually in late spring when the ground was soft enough to work and the trees were full of life. You can imagine yourself out there, axe in hand, the rhythmic thud of blade meeting wood echoing across the valley. Pine chips scatter at your feet. The smell is incredible. Resin and damp bark, sharp and alive. By sunset, every muscle aches, but the forest seems somehow less intimidating. Choosing where to build was an art form. Settlers looked for high ground to avoid flooding, natural windbreaks, trees thick enough to provide lumber but spaced enough to allow sunlight. Some oriented their cabins to face south, maximizing daylight during the short winter days. Others built near streams for water access, though that came with risks when spring thaws turned creeks into torrents. Did they learn these techniques from indigenous peoples who'd survived here for generations? Or was it trial and error, lessons written in blood and frostbite? Probably both. Once the site was chosen, construction became a race against time. You needed 4 walls and a roof before the first snowfall, or you wouldn't make it. Many settlers built what they called a half-faced camp first. 3 walls and a roof, just enough shelter to sleep in while the main cabin took shape. The smell of fresh-cut timber filled the summer air. Sap stuck to fingers. The constant sound of hammering and sawing became a kind of music. Each log had to be notched carefully, stacked precisely, then sealed with chinking, a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and sometimes animal hair. It looked crude, but it worked surprisingly well at keeping out the wind. Inside, the walls were bare. The floor was usually just packed earth, sometimes covered with straw or animal skins. Nails were expensive and rare, so everything was held together with wooden pegs and carefully carved notches. Every joint had to fit perfectly, because even the smallest gap would become a winter draft, a pathway for cold air to steal your warmth at night. When winter came, it found every weakness. A proper cabin had a fireplace built from fieldstone gathered from nearby streams. The chimney was often constructed from sticks coated in clay, a design that worked well until it didn't, and more than a few cabins burned down because of it. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Build to survive the cold, die in the flames. You can imagine the satisfaction of finishing the roof just as the first snow began to fall. The sound of snowflakes hitting those fresh shingles would have been the sweetest music after months of backbreaking labour. But the work never truly ended. A cabin was a living thing that required constant attention. Logs shifted as they dried. Clay cracked in the cold. Snow piled against doors, sometimes trapping people inside. Every morning required an inspection, feeling along the walls with the back of your hand, searching for drafts. Every evening brought the sound of wood creaking and settling, as if the cabin itself was breathing. Many diaries mention this strange companionship settlers felt with their homes. The cabins seemed almost alive, groaning and sighing through the winter nights. One woman in Vermont wrote that she could predict the weather by the sounds her cabin made. A sharp snap in the beams meant deep cold was coming. A gentle moan meant snow. To modern ears that sounds fanciful, But when your survival depends on wood and fire, you learn to read every sign. Not all cabins were equal. Some frontiersmen had the skills and resources to make theirs almost comfortable. Lofts for sleeping, small windows covered in oiled paper to let in light, wooden shutters to block the wind. Others lived in what amounted to wooden boxes, barely more than sheds. You can feel the difference when you imagine lying on a bed of straw beside a smoking hearth, listening to the wind whistle through gaps in the walls. The cold always found you eventually. Here's a detail often overlooked. Even in hardship, people decorated. Bits of cloth were hung over cracks, not just for warmth, but for colour. Animal skulls mounted on walls served as trophies, and, some believed, as protection against evil spirits. Dried herbs hung from rafters, scent in the air and reminding people of warmer seasons. Were these customs born from superstition, practicality, or simply the human need for beauty even in the harshest circumstances? Probably all three. Step outside again. Morning sun glints off a frozen world. The cabin casts a long shadow across the snow. Small but steady, proof of your labour, a fragile victory against the wilderness. Inside, warmth builds slowly as the fire catches. You hear it crackle, feel heat spread across your hands. The cabin is rough, imperfect, but it holds. It keeps the wind out and keeps your breath in. In this vast, indifferent wilderness, that's everything. Sitting by the hearth, you realise that every board, every log, every smear of clay represents a pact between you and the land. You will endure it, and it will endure you. Outside, the forest waits, still, white, patient as time itself. Inside, you stir the embers and listen to your home breathe. You wake before dawn to the sound of an axe striking wood. The rhythm is steady, almost musical, a bell tolling across the frozen hills. Every impact is a promise. We will survive this. You step outside. Boots crunch on fresh snow. Your breath curls upward like smoke. The air smells of pine and frost, the kind of cold that bites your cheeks and jolts you fully awake. Soon, your hands wrap around the rough handle of an axe, and you join the rhythm that keeps the frontier alive. Firewood is everything here. More than warmth, it's currency, comfort, the thin line between sleep and death. A family might burn through 15 cords of wood before spring. That means endless chopping, hauling, stacking, praying the pile lasts. Not all wood burns the same, and settlers learned this quickly. Oak burns slow and hot, perfect for overnight fires. Hickory gives fierce, steady heat but pops and sparks like gunfire. Pine catches easily but smokes terribly, coating cabin walls with soot. There's an old saying from those days, cut pine and you'll cry twice, once when you chop it, once when you choke on it. You can picture yourself in that pale morning light, swinging the axe again and again. Impact shudders through your shoulders. Your breath turns to steam. A rhythm takes over. Swing, crack, breathe, repeat. The cold sharpens everything. The smallest sounds, the splinter of bark, the creak of trees feel magnified. You pause to rest, leaning on the axe handle, and listen to the forest groan in the frost. Somewhere distant, a frozen branch snaps with a sound like a rifle shot. By late morning, a pile of logs stands as tall as you are. Each piece represents an hour of your life traded for another hour of warmth. Settlers sometimes name their wood piles, half joking, half serious. One journal from upstate New York mentions a farmer calling his stack the Silent Guard, as if it were a watchman standing vigil against the cold. That small quirk reveals the psychological strain of isolation. When snow cuts you off from the world, even firewood becomes company. Wood-gathering parties became common by the early 1800s. Neighbours would gather for a day of chopping, stacking and storytelling. Whiskey circulated, axes flashed, songs echoed through the woods. It was one of the few times community triumphed over loneliness. These gatherings weren't just social, they were insurance. Everyone knew that someday it would be their turn to need help. The work itself had a ritual quality. Men chopped while women and children gathered kindling, their mittens stiff with frost. The smell of burning sap drifted, rough the air. A pot of stew simmered near the cabin, steam mingling with smoke. You can almost taste it. Thin broth of salt pork and potatoes, eaten with hands too numb to feel the spoon. It wasn't luxury, but it pushed you through the cold. There's a strange beauty in how chopping wood defined frontier life. Simple, physical, endlessly repetitive, yet it gave shape to existence. An English visitor once wrote in his diary that to split logs in America is to split time itself, meaning the rhythm of work measured the rhythm of survival. His observation lingers across centuries, a poetic truth born from blisters and exhaustion. As the sun sets, shadows grow long and blue. The forest seems to close in, but the woodpile beside your cabin glows faintly in the fading light. Each log a small victory. Inside, the fire crackles, throwing orange light on rough walls. Warmth seeps into your bones, slow and deep. The day's ache begins to fade. You think about settlers who didn't cut enough wood before winter, the grim stories that followed. Cabins frozen shut, families burning furniture piece by piece, travellers found dead in the snow, only a mile from safety. One family in Kentucky reportedly dismantled their porch railings bit by bit just to keep the fire alive until March. Here's something interesting. People judged character by a person's woodpile. A neat, dry stack meant discipline and foresight. A messy, half-frozen heap meant carelessness, and neighbours would gossip about it. Frontier communities measured virtue in practical terms. To be good was to be prepared. As night deepens, you add another log to the fire. The flames catch, licking upward with a hungry hiss. The cabin fills with warmth and the scent of smoke and sap. Outside, snow keeps falling, soft, soundless, covering the world in white secrecy. You know that every ember in the hearth started as a swing of the axe, every moment of comfort earned through labour. In that quiet glow, surrounded by the smell of burning wood and the sigh of the wind, you understand the truth every settler learned the hard way. The frontier didn't reward bravery, it rewarded consistency. You didn't fight the cold, you fed it, one log at a time, and in return, it let you live. You wake in dim light before dawn. Your breath hangs in the air like mist. The cabin is cold again. Despite the woodpile outside, despite yesterday's labour, the fire has died down to faintly glowing embers half buried under grey ash. This moment is the frontier's first real test. Keeping a fire alive through the night isn't about comfort. It's the difference between waking up stiff and shivering or not waking up at all. You kneel beside the hearth, stirring the ashes carefully with a stick. Beneath the dust, a few coals flicker red, stubborn little hearts refusing to die. You blow gently. The glow brightens. A thread of smoke curls upward. It smells sweet, almost like caramelized wood. You feed the coals with dry twigs, patient and quiet, until flame catches and grows. The cabin begins to warm, just a little, but enough to make your fingers stop aching. Frontier families treated fire as almost sacred. They called it the household spirit. Losing it in winter could mean days of hardship trying to rekindle flame from scratch. Matches were rare, so settlers carried live embers wrapped in bark or moss when moving between cabins. In some communities, neighbours shared fire the way others share bread. There are accounts from New England describing people trekking miles through snow just to borrow a shovel of glowing coals from another homestead. The idea seems astonishing now, but in a world where a spark meant life, it made perfect sense. One travel diary from the late 1700s tells of a man who built a tiny clay pot solely for carrying coals. He called it his winter heart. The phrase caught on locally, and even today historians find it oddly touching, a reminder that warmth was more than physical. It was emotional, almost spiritual. A hearth wasn't simply fire, it was the pulse of the home. You sit closer, palms open to the heat. Light flickers across rough walls, throwing dancing shadows. The smell of smoke clings to everything, clothes, hair, the air itself. After a while you hardly notice. It becomes part of you, the scent of survival. Keeping fire alive through the night required skill and patience. Settlers used a technique called banking. Before sleep they'd cover burning logs with ashes, cutting off most oxygen but trapping enough heat to keep coals alive until morning. With luck, there'd be just enough life left to revive at dawn. Some added a thick log of oak or maple to smoulder slowly through the hours, what they called a sleeper log. Done right, the fire lasted till sunrise. Done wrong, the cold crept in mercilessly. Archaeologists have found traces of fire pits built slightly below cabin floors, designed to radiate heat upward. Scholars debate whether this came from indigenous influence or European peasant architecture. Either way, it shows how necessity drove innovation. When wind howled through cracks and frost formed inside windows, every small improvement felt like a miracle. Not every attempt succeeded. Many cabins filled with smoke because chimneys were poorly built or damp wood was burned. People learned to read smoke like a language. Thick white meant moisture. Thin blue meant good heat. A farmer in the Ohio Valley once wrote, "The smoke tells you if your day will be long or kind." That simple wisdom still feels poetic now. Then there were the odd tricks people swore by. Some tossed salt into flames, claiming it made fire burn cleaner. Others placed potatoes on the hearth overnight to draw out dampness. A few believed that never letting a fire die protected the house from evil spirits. Folklorists argue whether that belief had old world roots or grew from frontier superstition. Either way, people clung to it through long, fearful nights. You picture yourself sitting by the fire with a tin mug of wheat coffee, listening to the faint hiss of sap burning. Outside, snow falls soundlessly, muffling everything except the occasional groan of trees in the wind. Inside, flames breathe softly, reflecting in your tired eyes. You think about how much human effort is contained in that small circle of warmth. Days of chopping, hauling, tending. Every log is a story. Every ember a moment borrowed from nature. As the cabin warms, your thoughts drift. You imagine the families who sat where you sit now, watching the same dance of flame and shadow. Some made it through, some didn't. But all of them understood this truth. Fire wasn't just heat, it was hope made visible. Outside, winter presses against the walls. Inside, the fire crackles on, faithful and fierce, and for now, in this moment, that's enough. The world beyond the cabin door is frozen solid. You step outside into a landscape transformed overnight. Snow has fallen thick and heavy, muffling sound. turning familiar trails into unmarked expanses of white. The sky is the colour of steel, promising more to come. This is when the frontier reveals its true nature, not in the dramatic storms, though those will come, but in the slow, grinding pressure of day after day of cold, the isolation, the endless work, the way time seems to stop moving forward. You pull your coat tighter and head toward the well. Breaking ice for water is the first task of every winter morning. The ice is already an inch thick and it's only early December. By January it will take a hammer and chisel just to reach liquid water below. The sound of ice breaking echoes across the silent landscape, sharp, brittle, somehow lonely. Water was one of the great challenges of frontier winter. Streams froze. Wells became harder to access. Some settlers melted snow, but that required even more firewood, and the water always tasted flat, lifeless. There are accounts of families rationing water almost as carefully as food, using the same pot of water for cooking, washing, and drinking before finally giving it to livestock. Back inside, you set the bucket near the fire to keep it from freezing. The cabin is warming slowly, but you can still see your breath. This is normal. Frontier cabins were never truly warm in winter, just less cold than outside. You think about food. The root cellar beneath the cabin holds what remains of autumn's harvest. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, apples. Everything must be rationed to last until spring. There's salted pork hanging from the rafters, hard as leather. Dried beans in sacks, cornmeal, flour if you're lucky. Variety is a luxury you can't afford. Meals become monotonous. The same stew, the same porridge, the same hard bread day after day. Scurvy was common among settlers who had no access to fresh vegetables. So was winter sickness, a vague term that covered everything from malnutrition to depression brought on by months of isolation. One woman's diary from Massachusetts describes eating nothing but turnips and salt pork for 3 straight months. She wrote, "I dream of summer fruit with the desperation of a drowning woman dreaming of air." The psychological toll of winter isolation is something modern people struggle to understand. Imagine, no neighbours within miles, no way to travel, no communication with the outside world, just your immediate family, the same few faces day after day in a space no larger than a modern bedroom. Arguments flared over nothing. Children grew restless and cranky. Adults fell into dark moods. Some communities saw a spike in what they called winter madness, breakdowns in mental health brought on by confinement and monotony. And yet, people found ways to cope. They told stories by the fire, the same stories over and over until everyone knew them by heart. They sang songs. They worked on small projects, carving, sewing, whittling, anything to keep hands busy and minds occupied. Some kept journals, pouring their thoughts onto paper as a way of maintaining sanity. Reading those journals now is haunting. The handwriting sometimes deteriorates as winter progresses, becoming shaky and uncertain. Then, as spring approaches, it steadies again. You spend the morning doing small tasks, mending a tear in your coat, sharpening an axe blade, checking the chinking between logs for gaps. None of it is urgent, but all of it is necessary. Frontier life was like that, an endless series of small maintenances that, if neglected, would eventually lead to disaster. By afternoon, restlessness sets in. You need to move, to do something. So you bundle up and head outside to check the traps you set in the woods. The forest in winter is a different world. Silent except for the crunch of your footsteps, and the occasional distant crack of a frozen tree. You move between snow-covered pines, following a path you've memorized. Trapping was essential for most frontier families. Rabbits, squirrels, sometimes deer if you were lucky. Fresh meat meant the difference between mere survival and something approaching comfort. Pelts could be sold or traded when spring came, providing income for supplies you couldn't make yourself. But trapping in winter was hard, dangerous work. Setting traps meant hours in the cold. Checking them meant daily trips into the forest, even in storms. And the cold made everything more difficult. Hands too numb to work the mechanisms, feet going numb in boots that were never quite warm enough. Today, 2 of your traps hold rabbits. It's a small victory, but victories are small out here. You reset the traps and head back, the frozen rabbits slung over your shoulder. That night, rabbit stew simmers over the fire. The smell fills the cabin, rich, savoury, almost intoxicating after days of dried food. You eat slowly, making it last, knowing tomorrow will likely bring nothing but porridge and hard bread. As darkness falls, you sit by the fire and think about time, how differently it moves out here. In towns and cities, time is marked by clocks, by schedules, by the regular rhythm of commerce and society. Out here, time is marked by the sun, what little of it you see, and by the fire, and by the slow progression of winter itself. Each day is both endless and fleeting. Endless in the moment, when you're cold and bored and restless. Fleeting when you look back and realize weeks have passed in a blur of identical days. The frontier taught patience, not the calm, peaceful patience of meditation, but the grim, teeth-gritted patience of endurance. You learned to wait for spring, for warmth, for the day when you could finally open the door without being hit by a wall of freezing air. Outside, wind picks up. You hear it moaning around the cabin corners, testing the walls, searching for weaknesses. Snow begins to fall again. You can tell by the way the wind sounds change, softer and more muffled. You add another log to the fire, bank the coals for the night, and wrap yourself in blankets on your straw mattress. Tomorrow will be the same as today, and the day after that, and the day after that. But you'll endure, because that's what frontier life is, endurance. Not heroism, not adventure, just the stubborn refusal to give up day after day until winter finally breaks and the world comes back to life. You close your eyes and listen to the fire breathe. Outside, the storm grows stronger, but inside, you're safe. For now. And for now is all that matters. Weeks blur together. January arrives with a cold so deep it seems to have weight, pressing down on everything. You wake one morning to find frost has crept across the inside of the cabin walls, creating intricate patterns of ice crystals that would be beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. This is the heart of winter, the killing cold that settlers feared most. You've fallen into a routine. Wake before dawn, revive the fire, break ice for water, eat a small breakfast of cornmeal mush, spend the morning on necessary tasks, hauling wood, checking traps, maintaining the cabin, eat a midday meal, spend the afternoon on indoor work, repairing tools, mending clothes, rationing supplies, eat evening meal, tend the fire, sleep, repeat. It's monotonous, exhausting, but it keeps you alive. One morning you wake to an eerie silence, no wind, no creaking trees, just nothing. You step outside and understand immediately. The world has disappeared. Fog has rolled in overnight. Not normal fog, but a thick frozen mist that hangs in the air like a wall. You can barely see 10 feet in front of you. The cold is so intense it makes your lungs ache with every breath. This is what old-timers called pogonip, ice fog, where the moisture in the air freezes into tiny crystals that hang suspended, creating a ghostly white world. You've heard stories about people getting lost in pogonip, wandering away from their cabins and freezing to death within sight of home. So you stay close, moving carefully, a rope tied to the cabin door and to your waist. Even fetching water from the well feels like an expedition into the unknown. By afternoon, the fog begins to lift and you see what it's left behind, every surface coated in a layer of frost so thick it looks like fur. Trees have become white sculptures. The cabin roof glitters like it's been dusted with diamonds. It's breathtaking and deadly. That night, the temperature plummets even further. You hear the trees begin to crack and pop, the forest's gunfire announcing that this is one of the coldest nights of the season. You pile every blanket you own onto your bed and still shiver through the darkness. Morning reveals the damage. One of the shutters has cracked in the cold. A section of chinking has fallen out of the wall, leaving a gap that whistles with wind. The door has warped and won't close properly. These aren't minor problems. They're potentially life-threatening. You spend the entire day making repairs, working with hands so cold you can barely feel them, knowing that every gap, every crack is an invitation for the cold to come inside. This is what the frontier was really like. Not grand battles against nature, but constant grinding maintenance. Fighting to hold on to what you'd built. Refusing to let the wilderness take it back. February brings a false thaw. For 3 days, temperatures rise above freezing. Snow begins to melt. You hear water dripping from the roof, a sound that brings almost painful hope. Maybe winter is ending early. Maybe the worst is over. But you know better. You've heard the old-timers talk about false thaws, about how they trick you into letting your guard down. Sure enough, the cold returns with a vengeance. The melted snow refreezes into treacherous ice. The brief warmth has made things worse, not better, and then the real storm hits. It starts late one afternoon, a few gentle snowflakes that quickly multiply into a wall of white. Wind picks up, howling like something alive and angry. Within an hour you can't see the forest beyond the clearing. Within 2 hours you can't see the woodpile 10 feet from the door. This is a blizzard. A real one. You've prepared as best you can. Wood is stacked inside the cabin. Water is stored. Food is rationed. The fire burns strong. All you can do now is wait it out. The storm lasts 3 days. 3 days of wind screaming around the cabin, shaking the walls, rattling the shutters. 3 days of snow piling higher and higher until it reaches halfway up the door. 3 days of living in a world reduced to the size of a single room, the fire your only companion, the darkness pressing in. You sleep fitfully, waking to feed the fire, then sleeping again. Time becomes meaningless. You lose track of whether it's day or night. The storm creates its own reality, and you exist inside it like a small animal in a den, just trying to survive. When the storm finally breaks, the silence is shocking. You push open the door, it takes all your strength to move it against the packed snow, and step into a transformed world. Snow has buried everything. The woodpile is a mound of white. The path to the well has vanished. Even the forest looks different. The trees bent under the weight of snow, some of them broken. The sky is heartbreakingly blue. The sun, weak but present, makes the snow glitter like a field of stars. You take a deep breath. The air is so cold it hurts, but it's clean and still. The storm has passed. Now comes the work of digging out, clearing paths, finding the well under 3 feet of snow, breaking new ice, checking for damage to the cabin. It takes 2 days to get back to something approaching normal. Your back aches, your hands are raw, but you're alive. The cabin stood. You made it through. And there, in the exhaustion and relief, you feel something unexpected. Pride. You survived. Not through luck, but through preparation and endurance. The frontier tested you, and you didn't break. As February fades into early March, you begin to notice small changes. The sun rises a little earlier each day. The cold, while still bitter, doesn't seem quite as intense. The light has a different quality, sharper, clearer, holding the promise of warmth to come. You're not there yet. Spring is still weeks away, but you can feel it coming, like a distant ship on the horizon. You've made it through the worst. The heart of winter is behind you, and as you sit by the fire that night, tired and sore but fundamentally unbroken, you understand what the frontier really teaches. Not that you're stronger than nature, you're not, but that you're capable of endurance you never knew you possessed. The cold will return next year, and the year after that, but now you know you can survive it, and that knowledge, hard won and tested, is worth more than gold. March arrives with a complexity of its own. Some days hint at spring, temperatures climbing above freezing, snow melting into mud, the sound of water running everywhere. Other days, winter reasserts itself with late storms that dump fresh snow on a world already exhausted by cold. This is the season of in-between, not winter, not spring. A liminal time that tests patience in new ways. You've been trapped inside, or near, I sew, for months now. The cabin that once felt like safety now feels like a prison. The walls seem to close in. You know every crack, every knot in the wood, every stain on the floor. Cabin fever, they call it, and it's real. A restlessness that crawls under your skin, making you irritable and anxious. You find yourself pacing, unable to settle, desperate for anything different. On a day when the temperature climbs above freezing, you decide to venture further from the cabin than you have in weeks. Just to the ridge overlooking the valley, to see something beyond the same 4 walls. The walk is harder than you expected. Snow has melted and refrozen repeatedly, creating a crust that sometimes holds your weight, sometimes breaks through, plunging your leg thigh-deep into wet snow beneath. It's exhausting, frustrating work. But when you reach the ridge and look out over the valley, something in your chest loosens. The world is still there, vast, indifferent, beautiful. You can see smoke rising from distant cabins, proof that you're not alone, that others have endured the same winter. You can see the river, partially thawed, moving sluggishly between banks of ice. You can see the forest stretching to the horizon, patient and eternal. For months your world has shrunk to the size of a cabin and a small clearing. Standing here, you remember that you're part of something larger. It helps. Not much, but enough. The walk back is just as exhausting, but your mood has lightened. You've broken the spell of confinement, reminded yourself that winter will end. As March progresses, the signs of coming spring multiply. You hear birds, the first you've heard in months. Just a few crows at first, then others. Each call feels like a small celebration. the snow begins to retreat from the southern exposures, revealing bare ground for the first time since November. You touch the earth with your hand, still frozen solid, but warming. One morning you wake to a sound you'd forgotten, rain instead of snow. It's mixed with sleet, and the cold rain is almost as miserable as snow, but it's different, a sign of transition. The settlers called this time the breaking, when winter's grip finally breaks and the world begins to thaw. It's messy and chaotic, mud everywhere, water dripping from every surface, the constant sound of melting and running water. But it's also hopeful. Your supplies are running low now, the root cellar is nearly empty. You're down to the last of the salted pork, the bottom of the flour barrel. Every meal is carefully calculated. Can you make it to spring? The arithmetic of survival becomes urgent. This is when some settlers didn't make it, not because of the cold, but because they ran out of food just as winter was ending. So close to survival, yet not close enough. You ration even more carefully. Meals become smaller. Hunger becomes a constant companion. But you've come too far to give up now. And then, one morning in late March, you wake to a sound that makes you sit up in bed. Bird song. Not just crows, but smaller birds. Songbirds. You rush to the door and throw it open. The air is still cold, but there's a softness to it, a quality you'd forgotten. The snow has retreated to patches in the shadows. Bare earth dominates, and in the trees dozens of small birds flit and call, having returned from wherever they spent the winter. Tears prick your eyes. You're not sure why. Exhaustion, relief, joy. Probably all of it. Winter is ending. You've made it through. The next weeks bring rapid change. The snow melts entirely, turning the world into a sea of mud. The river swells with meltwater, roaring and churning. Buds appear on trees, tiny green promises. You begin the work of spring, preparing ground for planting, repairing winter damage to the cabin, hunting fresh game that's returning to the area. Your body aches from months of cold and confinement, but there's energy in the air now, a sense of renewal. One day in early April you realize you're warm, actually warm, not just less cold. The sun has real heat in it. You remove your coat and work in just a shirt, feeling sunlight on your arms for the first time in half a year. It's glorious. That night you leave the cabin door open, just a crack, but open. Fresh air flows in, carrying the scent of wet earth and growing things. The fire is small now, just enough for cooking, not for desperate warmth. You've survived. Against odds that once seemed impossible, you've made it through a frontier winter. As you sit by the small fire, you think about everything you've learned. About fire and wood and ice, about loneliness and endurance, about the ways humans adapt to even the harshest conditions, about the thin line between survival and disaster. The frontier changed everyone who lived through it. It stripped away illusions, revealed what people were made of, taught lessons that couldn't be unlearned. You're not the same person who watched the first frost fall back in November. You're harder now, more capable, more aware of your own strength and your own limitations. The wilderness didn't conquer you, but you didn't conquer it either. Instead, you learned to exist within it, to survive it, to respect it. And as spring unfolds around you, green shoots pushing through soil, birds building nests, warmth returning to the world, you feel something you haven't felt in months. Hope. Not naive hope, but seasoned hope. The kind that's been tested and proven. You know winter will come again. Next year and the year after, for as long as you choose to live on this frontier, but now you know you can survive it, and that knowledge changes everything. The cabin door stands open to the April evening. Soft light filters through budding trees. The fire crackles quietly. A friend now, not a desperate necessity. You survived the frontier winter, the hardest test this land can offer, and you're still here, still standing, still breathing. Tomorrow, you'll plant seeds, you'll rebuild, you'll prepare for the next winter whenever it comes, but tonight you simply sit in the warmth and the growing light, and you rest. You've earned it. The months that follow are a blur of activity. Spring on the frontier is as demanding as winter, just in different ways. Instead of fighting cold, you're fighting time. The narrow window to plant crops, make repairs, gather and preserve food before the cycle begins again. The garden plot you cleared last year is soggy with snowmelt. You work the soil with crude tools, breaking up clumps, mixing in what little manure you have from the livestock you've somehow kept alive through winter. Each seed you plant represents hope. Hope that it will sprout, that rain will come but not too much, that summer heat won't scorch it, that you'll have enough to harvest before next winter. The physical work is intense after months of relative inactivity. Your muscles, soft from winter, ache and protest. But there's joy in it too, being outside, feeling sun on your skin, seeing green things grow. Neighbours begin to appear. With the thaw comes the possibility of travel again. A family from 3 miles west walks over to trade news and supplies. They made it through winter too, though they lost 2 goats to the cold, and their youngest child ran a fever for a week that almost didn't break. You trade stories, who made it, who didn't, which cabins are now standing empty. It's sobering. 3 families in the area didn't survive. 2 packed up and went back east before the worst of winter. 1? Well, no one's sure. Their cabin is silent. These gatherings are brief. Everyone has too much work to linger, but they're vital. Proof that you're not alone, that others share this strange, hard life. By May, the transformation is remarkable. The forest is fully leafed out, creating a green canopy that blocks out much of the sky. Wildflowers bloom in patches of sunlight. The river, which was ice not long ago, now runs clear and fast. You've almost forgotten what cold feels like. Almost, but not quite. The memory of winter lingers in your bones, in the calluses on your hands, in the way you automatically check the woodpile even though you won't need it for months. Summer brings its own challenges. Heat and humidity make the cabin stifling. Insects swarm, mosquitoes, flies, things that bite and sting. Thunderstorms roll through with terrifying intensity, lightning striking close enough to make your hair stand on end. But compared to winter, summer is paradise. You work the garden daily, weeding, watering during dry spells, watching for pests. The plants grow with astonishing speed. Beans climb their poles. Squash vines sprawl across the ground. Corn reaches toward the sky. It's working. You're going to have a harvest. The relief is almost overwhelming. This is what winter was for, to get to this moment, to see food growing, to know that next year's survival is taking root in the soil. July and August are a race against time. Vegetables ripen faster than you can pick them. You preserve everything you can, drying beans, smoking meat, storing root vegetables in the cellar you've dug deeper and better insulated. Every jar filled, every string of dried food hung from the rafters is a small victory against the coming cold. Because you know it's coming. Even in the heat of August, you think about winter. You start cutting wood early. You repair the cabin with lessons learned from last year's hardships. You chink the walls more thoroughly. You reinforce the shutters. You're preparing. Again. Always. September arrives with cooler mornings. The light changes, sharper, clearer. Leaves begin to turn colour at the edges, first just a few, then more. The world becomes painted in gold and red and orange. It's beautiful, and it's a warning. You work harder, faster. The harvest comes in, more than last year because you've learned. You fill the root cellar until it's packed. You smoke and salt meat. You gather nuts from the forest. You cut more wood than you think you'll need, because last year you learned what not enough feels like. By October, you're as ready as you'll ever be. And then, one morning, you wake to see your breath fog in the air inside the cabin. Frost rimes the window. The world outside has that particular steel blue shimmer. Winter is returning. But this time, you're not afraid. You're prepared. You know what's coming, and you know you can survive it. You step outside and watch the first snowflakes begin to fall, soft and gentle, like whispers from the sky. The cycle continues. Winter, spring, summer, fall. Each season with its demands, its dangers, its small moments of beauty. This is the frontier. This is survival. Not a single heroic act, but thousands of small decisions repeated day after day, season after season. You go back inside, close the door, stir the fire to life, and you settle in for another winter. Stronger this time, wiser, more capable. The wilderness still surrounds you, vast and indifferent. But you've learned its rhythms. You've earned your place here. And as the snow begins to accumulate outside, you sit by the fire and feel something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for the hardship, you're not a fool, but for the life it's shaped, for the strength it's revealed, for the simple, hard-won knowledge that you can endure. Outside, the wind begins to pick up. The first storm of the season is building. Inside, the fire burns steady and warm. You've survived one winter. You'll survive this one too, and all the winters to come, because that's what you do now. You endure, you persist, you survive, one day at a time, one log at a time, one breath of cold air at a time. This is your life on the frontier, and against all odds, you're still here, still breathing, still fighting, still alive. The fire crackles, the wind howls, the snow falls, and you sit in your small circle of warmth and light, and you endure. Because that's all anyone can do. That's all anyone has ever done, and somehow, impossibly, it's enough. Good night, traveller. Sleep well. The fire will keep burning until morning. But let's not end there. There's more to this story, more layers to frontier life that deserve attention. Because survival wasn't just about the physical battle against cold and hunger. It was about the mental fortitude required to face the same challenges year after year, knowing each winter could be your last. Let's go deeper. You wake on a November morning in your second year on the frontier. The air has that familiar bite, winter announcing its return. But this time something is different. You're different. Last year you were terrified. Every challenge felt insurmountable. Every storm felt like the end. But you made it through, and that experience has fundamentally changed how you see the world. You step outside and survey your homestead. The wood pile is already substantial. You started cutting in August this time, not waiting until the last minute. The cabin has been reinforced with lessons learned from painful experience. The root cellar is deeper, better insulated, stocked earlier. You're not just surviving anymore, you're adapting, learning, becoming part of this landscape. A neighbour stops by, a man named Thomas who settled 2 miles north last spring. He's nervous, asking questions about winter, about preparation. You recognise the fear in his eyes. It's the same fear you had last year. You share what you've learned, how to bank a fire, which wood burns best, how to read the weather by watching the trees, the importance of rationing not just food, but also hope, saving small pleasures for the darkest days when morale runs lowest. Thomas listens intently, taking mental notes. You realise that you've become what you needed last year, someone who's been through it and survived. The knowledge feels heavy and valuable at the same time. After he leaves, you think about community. How settlers needed each other not just for labour, but for knowledge transfer. Every person who survived a frontier winter carried lessons that could save lives. Every person who didn't survive became a cautionary tale. There was an informal hierarchy on the frontier, based not on wealth or birth, but on winters survived. A 5-winter veteran commanded respect. A 10-winter veteran was considered wise. These weren't formal titles, but everyone understood the system. You're a 2-winter person now, still learning, but no longer a novice. The days grow shorter. By mid-November, you're back in the rhythm you remember. Wood, water, food, fire. The endless maintenance, the constant vigilance. But it feels different this time, more manageable, almost routine. One evening you sit by the fire and think about the people who left, the ones who tried frontier life for a season or two and then retreated back east. You don't judge them anymore. This life isn't for everyone. It requires a particular kind of stubbornness, a willingness to endure discomfort that most people simply don't possess. But for those who stay, for those who make it through multiple winters, something remarkable happens. The frontier stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like, not a friend exactly, but a familiar adversary. One you've learned to respect and navigate. December arrives with heavy snows. You watch from your window as the world transforms into white. But this year, you notice things you missed before. The way snow piles differently depending on wind direction. The subtle colour changes in the sky that predict the next storm. The sound of the forest settling into winter silence. You're learning to read the wilderness like a book. One particularly cold night, you hear wolves howling in the distance. Last year, that sound filled you with primal fear. This year, you simply note their location and move on. They're part of the ecosystem, no more threatening than the cold itself, dangerous if respected improperly, but manageable with awareness. The wolves rarely come close to human habitation. They have easier prey in the forest, but occasionally during the hardest winters, desperation drives them closer. You've heard stories of wolves circling cabins, of livestock taken, of close calls. You check your door, make sure it's secure, and add a log to the fire. Prepared but not panicked. This is growth. This is adaptation. January brings the deep cold again, the kind that makes your lungs burn, that freezes water within minutes of drawing it from the well. But you've prepared for this. Extra blankets, more firewood stacked inside, better chinking in the walls. The cold is still brutal, but it's a brutality you've experienced before, familiar in its way. You think about the indigenous peoples who lived here for thousands of years before European settlers arrived. They understood this land in ways settlers are only beginning to grasp. They knew which plants provided winter nutrition, which animals could be hunted when, how to move through snow efficiently, how to predict weather patterns with incredible accuracy. Some settlers learned from native neighbours. Others, too proud or too isolated, learned through suffering. You fall somewhere in between, gleaning what knowledge you can from occasional encounters, but mostly learning through trial and error. There's a particular type of loneliness that comes with the second winter. The first year, everything was novel and terrifying. That provided its own kind of stimulation. The second year, you know what's coming. The monotony becomes oppressive in new ways. You combat it by creating small rituals. Every Sunday you allow yourself an extra portion of dried fruit, a tiny luxury that makes the week feel structured. You carve wooden figures by the fire, simple animals that line your windowsill. You keep a more detailed journal this year, recording not just events but thoughts, observations, the evolution of your own psyche. Writing helps. It creates a sense of audience, even if that audience is just your future self. It makes you feel less alone. February arrives with another blizzard. 3 days of being trapped inside just like last year. But this time, you've prepared entertainment. A book, precious and expensive, that you saved for exactly this moment. Dried meat that's actually palatable, not just survivable. A small amount of whiskey for medicinal purposes and morale. The storm rages, but inside you're not just surviving. You're maintaining a quality of life that would have seemed impossible last year. When the storm breaks, you dig out faster, more efficiently. You know where the drifts will be deepest, where to start clearing, how to pace yourself to avoid exhaustion. Experience is the frontier's greatest teacher. March brings the familiar pattern, false thaws, late snows, the slow breaking of winter's grip. But this year, you notice signs of spring earlier. You know what to look for. The subtle shift in light quality. The first brave bird calls. The way the snow compacts and transforms before melting. And then, one morning in late March, you hear it. Geese flying overhead, their calls echoing across the awakening land. You step outside and watch them pass. Hundreds of birds in V formation, heading north to breeding grounds. It's one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. Spring returns with its frantic energy, planting, repairing, preparing. But this year, you're more efficient. You've learned which crops grow best in your particular soil, which repairs are urgent and which can wait. How to pace yourself to avoid burnout. Your garden is larger this year, more diverse. You're experimenting with different varieties, learning what thrives and what fails in this specific microclimate. Summer comes and goes in a blur of growth and preservation. You connect more with neighbours this year, help with a barn raising 3 miles south, trade surplus vegetables for tools you need. Begin to feel part of a community, however scattered. And then, as autumn colours return and the air grows crisp, you face your third winter with something you never expected. Confidence, not arrogance. You know the wilderness can still kill you, but confidence in your skills, your preparation, your ability to endure. This is what the frontier does to people who stay. It strips away everything superfluous and reveals what you're made of. Some people discover they're not made for this life. Others discover reserves of strength they never knew existed. You've discovered both your limits and your capabilities, and somehow, impossibly, you found a life here. As the first snow of your third winter begins to fall, you stand outside your cabin and breathe in the cold air. It still hurts your lungs. It's still brutal, but it's also familiar. This is your home now. These are your seasons. This is your life. You go inside, close the door and light the fire. Outside, winter settles in for another long siege. Inside, you're ready. More than ready. You're practiced, seasoned, a 3-winter, veteran now with all the knowledge and scars that implies. The fire crackles, the wind rises, the snow falls, and you sit in your cabin, warm and prepared, and you endure. Not because you have to, but because you've learned how, and that makes all the difference. Let's talk about the things that don't make it into the romantic versions of frontier history. The mundane details that actually define daily life. The small innovations that meant the difference between comfort and misery. Take clothing, for instance. By your 3rd winter, you've learned that how you dress matters as much as how you heat your cabin. Layers are everything. You wear wool closest to your skin. It stays warm even when wet. Leather over that for wind protection. Furs if you can get them, though they're expensive and require maintenance. Your boots are a constant project. The frontier is hard on footwear. Wet-dry cycles from snow and fire crack leather. Constant use wears through soles. You've learned basic cobbling by necessity, patching and repairing the same boots over and over because new ones would require a trip to town. Impossible in winter, expensive in summer. Mittens are better than gloves for warmth, but worse for dexterity. You compromise with fingerless gloves worn under mittens, giving you options depending on the task. These seem like trivial details, but they're not. Frostbite was common on the frontier. People lost fingers and toes regularly. Some lost more. Proper clothing was life or death, and learning what worked required time and often painful experience. Then there's the issue of light. Modern people don't think about light. We flip switches. On the frontier, light was a resource to be managed. Candles were expensive, so you made them yourself from tallow, rendered animal fat that smelled terrible when burning, but provided precious illumination. You learned to time tasks by available light, complex work during the day, simple repetitive tasks in the evening by candlelight, early to bed because staying up late wasted resources. Winter meant long nights of darkness, 15, 16 hours of night in December. You learn to sleep more in winter, partly from necessity, partly because there was simply nothing else to do once the sun set and you'd rationed your candle supply for the month. Some settlers went slightly mad from the darkness. The lack of light affected moods, created a melancholy that was hard to shake. Others adapted, finding peace in the quiet darkness, using it for rest and reflection. You fell somewhere in the middle, disliking it but accepting it as the price of this life. Food preservation was another constant challenge that required creativity and skill. You've learned dozens of preservation techniques by your 3rd winter. Smoking meat, yes, but also salting, drying, and when possible, freezing, using nature's own cold storage. Root vegetables go in the cellar, carefully layered with straw to prevent contact and rot. Apples the same, though they must be checked weekly for spoilage. One bad apple really does spoil the barrel. Beans and corn dry well. Squash keeps for months in a cool, dry place. Cabbage can be buried in the ground, insulated with straw, and dug up as needed. A technique you learned from a German settler. Every culture brought different preservation knowledge. The frontier became a melting pot of techniques, with successful methods spreading quickly through communities. You've learned to make sauerkraut, fermented cabbage that provides crucial nutrition in winter. The first time you tried it, the taste was shocking. Now you crave it. Your body knows it needs the nutrients. Personal hygiene was another aspect of frontier life that required adjustment. Bathing in winter was rare. Water had to be heated over the fire, a process that consumed firewood you needed for warmth and cooking. Most settlers bathed monthly at best during winter, sometimes less. You learned to live with your own smell, with everyone's smell. The cabin reeked of smoke, sweat and bodies, but after a while you stopped noticing. In summer you bathed in the river, glorying in the cold water and the feeling of being clean. Those summer baths made winter's grime more bearable, a sensory memory to hold on to. Laundry was equally challenging. Clothes couldn't be washed often in winter. You aired them out, brushed off visible dirt, and lived with the rest. Come spring, everything went into a massive laundry day that left you exhausted but feeling renewed. These details aren't glamorous, they don't make for exciting stories. But they were the reality of frontier life, the constant low-level discomfort, the acceptance of conditions that would horrify modern sensibilities, the gradual recalibration of what clean, comfortable, and acceptable meant. Mental health was perhaps the greatest challenge, though people didn't call it that at the time. The isolation, the monotony, the constant stress of survival, it took a toll. Some people became depressed, sitting by the fire in a stupor, unable to muster energy for necessary tasks. Others became anxious, jumping at every sound, convinced disaster was imminent. You experienced both at different times. Days when getting out of bed felt impossible. Days when every noise outside sent your heart racing. You learned coping mechanisms. Routine helped. Having a structure to each day provided psychological anchors. Small goals helped too. Not survive winter, but get through today, or even get through the next hour. Talking to yourself became normal. Narrating tasks, asking questions aloud, having conversations with imaginary companions. It was a way to fill the silence, to maintain language skills, to feel less alone. You weren't going crazy. You were adapting. Some settlers kept elaborate journals, filling pages with observations, thoughts, even drawings. The act of writing provided structure and purpose. Those journals, the ones that survived, provide historians with invaluable insights into frontier psychology. Others coped through faith. Prayer provided comfort and routine. The Bible was often the only book in a frontier cabin, read and reread until passages were memorized. Whether you believed literally or not, the ritual of daily prayer created structure in formless time. You weren't particularly religious when you arrived. By your third winter, you found yourself praying, not necessarily to a specific deity, but to something. The universe, fate, hope, itself. It helped. Community gatherings, rare as they were, took on enormous importance. When weather permitted and work allowed, settlers gathered for barn raisings, corn huskings, quilting bees. These were work parties, yes, but also vital social occasions. A chance to see new faces, hear different voices, remember you were part of something larger. You learned to cherish these gatherings, to savour every moment of human connection. The laughter, the shared stories, even the arguments, all of it felt precious after weeks of isolation. And you learned the other side too, the skill of being alone without being lonely, of finding sufficiency in your own company, of developing an interior life rich enough to sustain you through long silences. This might be the frontier's greatest gift. It taught you who you were when all external distractions were stripped away. Some people didn't like what they found. Others discovered unexpected depths. You discovered both strength and vulnerability, capability and limitation, independence and the absolute necessity of occasional human connection. By your fourth winter, You'd achieved something remarkable. Equilibrium. You knew the rhythm, understood the demands, had systems in place for every challenge. The frontier hadn't become easy. It would never be easy. But it had become manageable. You'd also become part of the landscape in a way that first-year settlers weren't. You knew where deer bedded down in storms, which springs never froze, where to find specific plants for medicine or food. The forest had revealed its secrets slowly, and you'd paid attention. Local indigenous people, when you encountered them, treated you differently now. Not as a friend exactly. The relationship between settlers and native peoples was complicated and often tragic. But as someone who'd proven they could survive here, that commanded a certain respect. You'd learned a few words of their language. They'd learned you were honest in trades. A cautious mutual understanding had developed, born from proximity and practicality. Children began appearing in the area, settlers' children, born on the frontier or brought west as infants. Watching them grow up in this environment was fascinating. They feared nothing you'd feared. The forest was their playground. The cold was just weather. They were frontier children, a new generation born to this life. You helped when parents asked, sharing knowledge, offering assistance, and you learned from the children too, their adaptability, their lack of preconception about what life should be. By your 5th winter, neighbours sometimes asked your advice. You'd become an old-timer, though you didn't feel old, just experienced, weathered, changed by this place in ways you couldn't fully articulate. You'd lost things, softness, innocence, certain illusions about human nature and the natural world. But you'd gained things too, resilience, competence, a bone-deep understanding of your own capabilities. The frontier had been your crucible. It had burned away everything unnecessary and revealed what remained. And what remained was strong. As you sit by your fire on a February night in your 5th year, you think about the person you were when you arrived. That person seems like a stranger now, naive, unprepared, terrified of everything. You've become someone else, someone harder and softer simultaneously, someone who can split wood for hours without complaint, but who tears up at the first robin song of spring. The frontier does that. It breaks you down and rebuilds you. Not everyone survives the process, but those who do emerge transformed. Outside, wind howls around the cabin. Inside, the fire burns steady. You add a log and watch sparks spiral upward. You've survived another winter. You'll survive the next, and the next, 'cause that's who you are now. A survivor, a frontier person, someone who's learned that endurance isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up. The fire crackles its approval. The cabin creaks its familiar song. And you settle in for another long night, secure in the knowledge that when morning comes, you'll rise and do it all again. Because that's what you do. That's what you've always done. And that's what you'll keep doing for as long as this land allows. One day, one log, one breath at a time. This is survival. This is life. This is the frontier. And somehow, impossibly, it's enough. More than enough. It's home. But let me tell you about the moments that stay with you. The ones that define your relationship with this land in ways that daily survival never could. There was a night in your 6th winter. February. Deep cold. The kind that makes everything brittle. You'd gone outside to fetch more wood, and as you stood there, arms loaded with logs, you looked up. The aurora borealis danced across the northern sky. You'd seen it before, but never like this. Curtains of green and purple light rippling and swirling, so bright they cast shadows on the snow, so beautiful it hurt to look at, so vast it made you feel simultaneously insignificant and part of something cosmic. You stood there until your hands went numb just watching. The wood could wait. This couldn't. That moment changed something, reminded you that the frontier wasn't just hardship. It was also wonder, raw, untamed beauty that cities would never know. You went inside eventually, hands aching as they thawed, but your soul fell, tea warmer than the fire could make it. There were other moments too. The morning you woke to find a deer standing just outside your window, so close you could see its breath fog in the cold air. The two of you locked eyes for a long moment, mutual recognition between creatures who understood survival. Then it bounded away, white tail flashing. The day in spring when ice on the river broke with sounds like cannon fire, massive sheets fracturing and moving, the whole river coming back to life in a chaotic, thunderous celebration. You stood on the bank with neighbours, everyone grinning at the sheer, violent power of nature unleashed. The evening you helped deliver a baby at a neighbour's cabin, a girl, born healthy despite the circumstances. You'd never delivered a baby before, but the midwife 2 cabins over couldn't get through a late snow, so you stepped up. Terrified, uncertain, but unable to refuse. When that baby took her first breath and cried, you cried too. Life persisting, life continuing, life defiant in the face of everything that tried to extinguish it. These moments accumulated over years, creating a tapestry of experience that was uniquely yours and yet universal to everyone who'd ever lived on the frontier. By your 7th winter, you'd become someone people sought out for advice, not just about survival, but about life, about how to maintain hope during dark times, about how to find beauty in hardship, about what it meant to truly endure. You didn't have all the answers. Hell, you barely had any answers, but you'd lived it, and that counted for something. A young couple arrived in the area that fall, fresh from Philadelphia, eyes wide with dreams of frontier life. You recognized yourself in them, the naive optimism, the dangerous underestimation of what winter meant. You tried to help them prepare, but they waved off your concerns. They'd read books about frontier life. They were prepared. They knew what they were doing. You let it go. Some lessons can't be taught, only learned. That winter was brutal, one of the worst in a decade. Temperatures dropped to levels you'd never experienced. The snow came early and stayed late. Even with all your experience, you struggled. In late January, the young couple appeared at your door, half frozen, desperate. They'd run out of firewood. Their food stores were inadequate. They were starving and freezing and utterly broken by the realization of their own hubris. You took them in, fed them, warmed them, shared your own carefully rationed supplies, even though it meant you'd be cutting it close yourself. They stayed 3 days until the weather broke enough for them to return to their cabin with sacks of your food and instructions for better wood-cutting techniques. They made it through that winter, barely. Come spring, they came by to thank you and to say goodbye. They were heading back east. The frontier had defeated them, and they had the wisdom to admit it. You didn't judge them. Not everyone is meant for this life. The important thing was that they'd survived to make that choice. After they left, you stood in your doorway and thought about all the people who'd tried and failed, all the empty cabins scattered through the forest, all the dreams that had died in the cold. And you thought about the ones who stayed, the families putting down roots, the children being born into this life, the slow, painful process of civilization creeping into the wilderness. You were part of that process now, a link in a chain connecting the old world to whatever this new world was becoming. It felt significant, heavy, like a responsibility you'd never asked for but somehow accepted anyway. The seasons continued their eternal rotation. Winters got a little easier as you refined your techniques. Springs brought renewal and exhausting work. Summers provided bounty and preparation time. Falls arrived with beauty and urgent harvesting. Each year the community grew a little. Another cabin appeared. Another family decided to stay. Slowly, painfully, improbably, something resembling a settlement took shape. By your 10th winter, you were an elder statesman of the area. A decade on the frontier was a lifetime. You'd earned your wisdom through frozen fingers and empty bellies and nights of doubt so deep you weren't sure you'd see morning. Young settlers came to you with questions. You answered when you could, admitted ignorance when you couldn't. You'd learned that pretending to know everything was dangerous. The frontier punished arrogance swiftly. You'd also learned the value of stories. On long winter nights when families gathered in your cabin, the largest and best built in the area now, you told stories about your first winter, about the blizzard that nearly killed you, about the deer at the window and the baby born in a snowstorm. The stories served multiple purposes. They entertained, yes, but they also taught. Embedded in each tale were lessons about survival, about preparation, about endurance. The children especially loved the stories. They'd heard them before, but repetition didn't matter. The stories were becoming mythology, the foundation of this community's shared identity. You were creating oral history, though you wouldn't have used those words. You were simply sharing what you knew, the way it had been shared with you. One night, a boy, maybe 10 years old, born on the frontier, asked you a question that stopped you cold. What was it like before you came here, in the city? You realized you could barely remember. The details had faded. The noise, the crowds, the constant motion. It all seemed like a dream from someone else's life. You tried to describe it, but the words felt hollow. That world didn't exist for you anymore. This was your reality now. Trees and snow and fire and endless sky. The boy listened, fascinated, but you could tell it was as foreign to him as the frontier had once been to you. He was a child of this place. The city was mythology to him, as distant and unreal as fairy tales. That's when you understood. A transformation had occurred, not just in you, but in the community. You weren't settlers anymore, struggling against an alien environment. You were becoming indigenous to this place, learning its rhythms, adapting to its demands, becoming part of the ecosystem rather than invaders trying to conquer it. It hadn't happened overnight. It had taken years, winters, losses, and small victories accumulated over time. But it had happened. You'd become frontier people. This was your home in a way the old world could never be again. Your 11th winter brought a challenge you'd never faced. Illness. Fever gripped you in early December. One day you were fine. The next you were burning up, delirious, unable to rise from your bed. In the old days, this would have been a death sentence. Alone in a cabin, unable to maintain the fire or fetch water, you would have simply died, but the community you'd helped build rallied. Neighbours took turns sitting with you, keeping the fire going, forcing broth down your throat, wiping your fevered brow with snow-cold cloths. For 3 days, you drifted between consciousness and delirium. You had fever dreams about cities you'd left behind, people long dead, paths not taken, and then, slowly, the fever broke. You woke weak, and disoriented but alive. Your neighbours had saved you, the same way you'd saved that young couple years before. The web of mutual aid that made frontier life possible had held. You were alive because the community had decided you were worth saving. The recovery took weeks, well into January before you could do more than sit by the fire, February before you could resume normal activities. But that time wasn't wasted. Forced into stillness, you observed your own life from a new angle. You saw the routines you'd built, the small comforts you'd accumulated, the depth of connection you'd developed with this place and these people. You saw that somewhere along the way, survival had become life, not just existing, but truly living, finding meaning and purpose and even joy in the daily struggle. That realization felt like grace. By your 12th winter, you'd started thinking about legacy. You weren't old, not really, maybe early 40s, but the frontier aged people faster. You'd lost teeth. Your joints ached in cold weather. Your hands were permanently scarred from years of rough work. How many more winters did you have? 10? 20? Impossible to know. But you started thinking about what you'd leave behind. Not possessions. Those mattered little. But knowledge, stories, the accumulated wisdom of a dozen winters. You started writing more deliberately, recording not just events but techniques, how to bank a fire for maximum overnight efficiency, which plants could be eaten in early spring when food stores ran low, how to predict weather by cloud formations and animal behavior. You didn't know if anyone would ever read these writings, but the act of recording felt important, a gift to future generations if they wanted it. You also started teaching more intentionally, taking young people under your wing, showing them techniques, explaining the reasoning behind frontier practices. Some listened, some thought they knew better. You let them make their mistakes when the stakes weren't too high. Experience was still the best teacher. Winter 13 brought something unexpected. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. The frontier was still hard, still dangerous, still exhausting. But contentment. A bone-deep satisfaction with the life you'd built. You'd created something here. Not just a cabin and a cleared plot of land, but a life with meaning and purpose. You'd helped build a community. You'd survived when survival wasn't guaranteed. You'd become someone worth becoming. That contentment carried you through storms that would have destroyed your younger self. When supplies ran low, you didn't panic. When illness struck the community, you helped without fear. When winter seemed endless, you remembered it always ended. You developed what Buddhists might call equanimity, calm acceptance of reality as it was, not as you wished it to be. The frontier had been your teacher, and you'd finally learned the lesson. Control what you can, accept what you can't, and know the difference. Spring of that year brought news from the east. The country was growing, changing, pushing westward with increasing momentum. Towns were becoming cities. Roads were improving. The frontier you'd known was slowly being civilized. Part of you mourned this. The wild, untamed character of the place was fading. What you'd survived would become easier for the next generation. Was that good? Probably. Did it diminish what you'd accomplished? Maybe a little. But mostly you felt proud. You'd been part of the vanguard, one of the first. Your struggles had paved the way for those who came after. That summer, a government surveyor came through, mapping the area for official settlement. He was young, educated, full of optimism about America's manifest destiny. You talked with him over dinner. He was fascinated by your stories, scribbling notes about early settlement conditions. You were polite but bemused by his certainty that civilization was an unqualified good. He saw progress. You saw transformation, neither purely good nor bad, but inevitable. After he left, you walked to the ridge overlooking the valley. More cabins now, cleared fields, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. The beginning of a town, if you were generous in your definition. This was your legacy, not grand or glorious, but real, solid, built from endurance and stubbornness and refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. You'd survive the frontier. More than that, you'd help tame it, for better or worse. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, you felt something settle in your chest. Peace, maybe, or acceptance, or simply the quiet satisfaction of a job done as well as you could do it. Winter 14 began with the first snow in late October. You watched it fall and smiled. Another winter, another cycle, another chance to prove you could endure. You stoked the fire, checked your supplies, and settled in for the long, cold months ahead. Not with fear, not with dread, but with the calm confidence of someone who'd been here before, who knew every challenge that awaited, who understood that spring always came no matter how long winter lasted. The fire crackled, the wind rose, the snow fell, and you sat in your cabin, home, truly home, and breathed. This was your life, hard won, well earned, imperfect but yours. The frontier had tested you for 14 winters. 14 times you'd passed the test. How many more winters would you see? Only time would tell. But for now, in this moment, you were here, alive, warm, fed, surrounded by a community you'd helped build. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The fire burned bright. Outside, winter settled in for its long stay. Inside, you were ready. You'd always been ready. You just hadn't known it at first, but now you did. Now you understood. The frontier hadn't broken you. It had forged you, made you stronger in broken places, taught you truths you could have learned nowhere else, and for that, despite everything, you were grateful. Good night, traveller. The story continues. The fire keeps burning. Winter comes and goes, and life, hard, beautiful, impossible, precious life, endures. Always, the end and the beginning, and everything in between. But before we truly close this chapter, let me share one final reflection on what the frontier teaches those who survive it long enough to learn. There's a morning in your 15th winter that crystallizes everything. You wake before dawn, as always, and step outside into air so cold it feels solid. The stars are still visible, sharp and bright in the pre-dawn darkness. Frost glitters on every surface, transforming the mundane into the magical. You stand there, breath clouding, and realize something profound. You're not counting winters anymore, not measuring your life in survival milestones. This is simply life now, the rhythm of seasons, the cycle of preparation and endurance and renewal. The fear that dominated your first years has evaporated. In its place is something deeper, respect. Not comfort, not complacency, but earned respect for the power of nature and your own capacity to coexist with it. You think about the person you were 15 years ago, city soft, full of romantic notions about frontier life, utterly unprepared for the reality. That person is gone, replaced by someone you barely recognize in the mirror, weathered, scarred, capable. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It happened so gradually you barely noticed, like water wearing away stone, each winter eroding a little more of who you were and revealing who you was a-coming. You've learned that heroism isn't one grand gesture. It's getting up every morning when it would be easier to stay in bed. It's chopping one more log when your shoulders scream in protest. It's rationing food when you're hungry, because you know hunger in March is worse than hunger in December. You've learned that community isn't optional. The myth of the lone frontiersman conquering the wilderness is exactly that, a myth. Everyone who survived did so because of networks of mutual aid. The neighbour who shared coals when your fire died. The midwife who travelled through snow to help with a birth. The collective barn raisings and harvest celebrations that made isolation bearable. You've learned that nature is neither enemy nor friend. It simply is. Powerful, indifferent, operating by rules that don't care about human needs or desires. The only path forward is understanding those rules and working within them. You've learned that depression and despair are as dangerous as cold and hunger. That maintaining mental health requires intention and effort. That small rituals and routines can be the difference between giving up and pushing through. You've learned that children raised on the frontier are different from those raised in cities. Tougher in some ways, more vulnerable in others. They fear different things. They value different skills. They're creating a new culture, synthesized from old world values and new world realities. You've learned that change is constant. The frontier you settled 15 years ago barely exists anymore. More people, more cabins, better roads, periodic mail service, the beginnings of infrastructure. Is it still the frontier? Technically, yes, but the character is shifting. In another decade, it might be indistinguishable from established settlements back east. The cycle continues, new frontiers opening further west, drawing the restless and the desperate and the dreamers. Will you join them? Move further out, chasing the receding edge of wilderness? No, you're done chasing. This is home now. Let others push further west. You've found your place. You've learned that satisfaction comes not from conquering, but from adapting. Not from bending nature to your will, but from finding your niche within nature's patterns. You've learned that loss is inevitable. Neighbours who died, crops that failed, winters that took more than they gave. But you've also learned that life continues. New neighbours arrive, new crops are planted, new winters are survived. You've learned that your body has limits you're only now discovering, the aches that don't go away anymore, the injuries that never quite heal. The way cold settles deeper into bones each year, you're mortal. The frontier has made that abundantly clear, but you've also learned that mortality makes life more precious, not less. Every spring is a gift. Every sunrise is borrowed time. Every meal shared with friends is a small miracle. As the sun begins to rise, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, you feel something you've rarely allowed yourself. Pride. You've done something difficult. Not unique. Thousands of others have done the same, but difficult nonetheless. You've taken an uninhabited patch of wilderness and made it home. You've survived when survival required everything you had. You've contributed to something larger than yourself. The settlement growing in this valley exists partly because you endured. The knowledge you've shared has saved lives. The children growing up here are learning from your mistakes and your wisdom. That's legacy, not monuments or wealth, but impact. The ripples spreading out from your choices touching lives you'll never know about. The sun clears the horizon and you turn back toward your cabin. The fire needs tending. Water needs drawing. Life needs living. But first you pause at the threshold and look back one more time at the valley below. Smoke rises from chimneys. The river, partially frozen, glints in the morning light. The forest stretches endlessly in all directions, beautiful and terrible and home. This is what you've earned, the right to belong here, not through conquest, but through endurance, through respect, through the accumulated weight of 15 winters survived. You go inside and close the door. The fire crackles its welcome. The cabin embraces you with familiar smells and sounds. Outside, winter continues its reign. Inside, you're warm, fed, safe, alive. After 15 years, you've learned that these simple facts, warmth, food, safety, life, are everything. The rest is details. You pour yourself a cup of weak coffee and sit by the fire, watching the flames dance. Your body aches, your hands are scarred, your face is lined with years of weather, but you're here, still standing, still fighting the good fight against cold and hunger and despair, and as long as you're breathing, as long as the fire burns, as long as spring keeps returning after winter's siege, that's enough, more than enough. It's victory. Not the dramatic kind, with trumpets and celebration, but the quiet, persistent victory of survival, of endurance, of refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. The frontier has been your crucible, your teacher, your home. It's taken much from you, but given much as well. Strength, wisdom, purpose, a life with meaning, even if that meaning is simply the daily act of continuing to exist. You finish your coffee, stand up, stretch aching muscles, step outside to face another day of cold and work and challenge. But you face it with something you lacked 15 years ago, certainty. Certainty that you can handle whatever comes, that you've faced worse and survived. That spring will come again, no matter how long winter lasts. This certainty is the frontier's greatest gift, not comfort or ease or safety. You'll never have those, not really. But certainty in yourself, in your capacity to endure, in the strength that comes from being tested and not breaking. The snow crunches under your boots, the air burns your lungs, the morning sea stretches ahead with 100 small tasks, and you smile, because this is your life, hard won, well earned, yours. The frontier hasn't beaten you. 15 winters, and you're still standing. How many more? Only time will tell, but for now, in this moment, on this morning, you're here, alive, breathing, enduring, and that in the end is everything. That is the story of the frontier, not in grand gestures, but in countless small moments of persistence, not in dramatic victories, but in quiet refusals to surrender. This is what it means to survive, to wake each morning and choose to continue, to face the cold and the hunger and the loneliness and decide they won't define you. The fire burns, the seasons turn, life goes on, and you go on with it, one day at a time, one winter at a time, one breath at a time, forever changed, forever challenged, forever home. This is the frontier, this is survival, this is life, and it's enough, more than enough, it's everything.